Snowing outside, and we're getting ready to go to a mosque for the Way of the Master Radio. There's the mosque, and my wonderful husband, who will be doing all the follow-up today with the Imam. There's the Quran. We brought it with us. My husband is studying in Islam. We're going to go in and meet the Imam in just a second here.
And so usually one of the first stops for a person coming in, especially to offer worship, is right here with the restrooms. And we have a ritual of purification that we perform. And what it involves is washing the face, we wash our arms up to our elbows, and we wipe a wet hand over our head, and then we wash our feet up to our ankles. So it's a short, it doesn't take more than 30 seconds.
And that's what you do every time before
we perform worship.
Abdul, you just got off the Way of the Master Radio. Thank you for being on for both segments.
Great job. Now, Abdul, let me ask you, as a Sunni, where does the hadith fit in for you guys? Because I know that different Muslims have different opinions as far as the hadith.
The hadith for us is a source of authority.
It is authoritative.
It's authoritative, and it's a source of legal theory for us. So the Islamic legal theory, as far as we're concerned, is based off of the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet, the hadith.
Okay. Right. So what would you do? What would you do in a situation where, let's say, the hadith contradicts something the Quran would say?
Good question. Actually, this question was brought to me yesterday. We dealt with it in detail. Basically, if once again, I said that in the show as well, if the context and the situation is taken into consideration, you will eventually realize that there's not an apparent conflict. One hadith says that when a person is fasting, when we fast in Ramadan, we're not allowed to have sexual relations with our spouse. So one hadith says that you are allowed to kiss, though, while you're fasting, and another hadith says, no, you're not. What you end up realizing is the conversation that took place before and after that was that where the Prophet said you were allowed to kiss, it was an older man, and he was an old guy, senior, and where he told one of the persons who asked the question, can I kiss my wife when I'm fasting? He said, no, you cannot. It's because it was a newlywed. And after he answered the second question, he was in fact asked by some of the people who were present at both situations. I thought you said no, now you're saying yes. He said the reason is that the act of kissing itself is not a nullifier of the fast, but rather with the newlywed it will probably lead to something else. The older guy, he's disciplined enough, he's practiced enough, he's used to being married and fasting where he'll be able to draw the line and have a limit.
Muhammad says, if you wish to know the correct reading of the Quran, you would find it with Ibn Masud.
Right.
But yet, why was Ibn Masud's codex, Ibn Masud's version of the Quran, why was that done away with?
Not made
the standard.
The compilation of the Quran took place through a few different steps and processes. So actually started at the time of Abu Bakr. That Umar came to Abu Bakr and he said, we have to compile it all into one place together.
And what did Abu Bakr say?
Abu Bakr said, I can't do something Muhammad didn't do. Eventually he said, I saw the wisdom of what he was saying, that the people from the time of Muhammad, sure, they had it all memorized and they saw how it was coming down and how things were coming together. People later on won't have that insight. So they need to have a standard one-place text. So when the Quran was first compiled at the time of Abu Bakr, they had the 7 recitations of the Quran. Now what the 7 recitations of the Quran are, I studied Arabic grammar in detail, and that's when you really understand what the 7 recitations of the Quran are about, is that...
Having to do with the various vowel points and things like that.
Yeah, it's the sound change, it's a phonetics change.
Phonetics, yeah.
That's all it is. Now... So at that time they had all 7 recitations in play and everything. At the time of Uthman, when non-Arabs began to become Muslim now. So now, like I told you, when I first memorized the Quran and I memorized it, somebody later told me there's 7 recitations and I was 12 years old. and I spoke English was my first language, and then my parents spoke Urdu, and so I knew Urdu as well. Those were my two languages. I didn't know Arabic. I was like, what do you mean by 7 recitations?
Right.
So I was confused by that. But when I studied Arabic, I said, oh, okay, that's easy to figure out. So when non-Muslims began to accept Islam, at that time they said that this is confusing people, and it was confusing people, because we're both, let's say we're both Persian. We speak Persia. We speak Persian, and I learned Quran from somebody who recites with one recitation and another person with another recitation. Now, so when we recite to each other, I'm like, you're wrong, you're saying I'm wrong. So at that time, Uthman says, let's create one standard mainstream,
one standard mainstream reading
recitation, and that's what will be taught to people generally, and that's the one that's published in 99% of the Qurans. And overall, if you really look at the Quran, the main theme of the Quran is to briefly, very vaguely, to touch on topics. Like it talks 70 verses in the Quran say pray, but not one place in the Quran tells us how to pray. Then that's where the Prophet taught us how to pray. Specifics were not addressed in the Quran intentionally because it was an impossibility. It wasn't practical. So specifics were never addressed. I mean, there's so much so there's different types of prayer. There's a dozen different types of prayer, which are not even mentioned in the Quran.
I heard you say on the radio that you didn't know 100% you were going to paradise. Doesn't that kind of strike you? Because the Christian message is as if you obviously you've admitted to, breaking the law,
right?
And you've avowed yourself a liar,
right.
A person who has, had anger in his heart towards his brother, which Jesus equated with murder, and you've broken the various commandments, which according to what we consider the Word of God, Old and New Testament, that is worthy of punishment in hell, and the only assurance that you won't go there is faith through Christ. But the difference is that in biblical theology,
right.
we offer full assurance, where over and over Jesus assured his people of obtaining their inheritance.
Right.
of even the fact that you can have presently full assurance of your salvation, whereas in Islam, it's interesting to me, and I don't know if you've ever contemplated this, but in Islam, really, you don't know that you will go to paradise, and even if you go to paradise, wouldn't you agree with me, you never find out who Muhammad is, or who Allah is.
No, that doesn't happen.
Okay, well, I know that this is probably a conversation that we can go on forever and ever, but we appreciate your time.
No
and,
problem.
We just want to reiterate what Todd mentioned towards the end there, that obviously we believe that you have full assurance with what Christ has done on the cross. We can come in a full knowledge of our salvation and, know who God really is. But I appreciate your time.
No problem.
And I thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for coming.
And everything.
Thank you.
We
Thank
can
you very
stop
much.
there.
I appreciate it. Well, tell us, what do you think? I mean,
I think Abdul was a very, very nice Muslim man, and I think that, I wasn't really satisfied with some of the answers that he gave as far as the relationship between the Quran and the Hadith. I think they were a little bit, to me, they weren't really satisfactory because you have very strong words there, especially regarding those stoning verses, man.
Right.
I just don't think that
I was wondering why you kept going back to that. You kept,
Yeah, it's because you want to show that, what he says that the Hadith is authoritative, and so is the Quran. But here you have an explicit example of the Hadith and the Quran disagreeing.